What's up, everybody? Today I have with us Ashley Abbott. Ashley is a creative financing connoisseur. He's one of the best guys I know at creative deal structuring. He's built up a portfolio of over 60 doors in the Kansas City area in around 4 years. About 40 of those have been structured in creative manners. And Ashley's the guy that I come to speak to whenever I have a challenging deal to come across my plate that I need to structure in a unique way. Ashley has one of the best brains in the business for doing these creative deal structurings. Actually, he's also a DSCR lender, a mortgage broker. He's a jack of all trades, has access to basically everything you need to do to get into creative real estate. And so today we're going to be talking about the stack method. We're going to be talking about different ways that we can leverage seller equity to buy real estate properties. I know back when we were doing a lot of creative acquisitions direct to seller, there were all these situations where sellers would say, I wanted them to do seller financing, and they would say, hey, I'll finance you 50%. Right. And at that point in time, I said, no, that doesn't work. So it's 50% down, and that's just not going to make sense. Today, we're going to talk about those situations and how we can maybe have structured those deals differently to turn it into a win for the seller and also a win for the investor. Welcome, Ashley.
Hey Phil, yeah, you got most all that right. I buy and hold property in Kansas City. I buy a lot of sub two seller finance deals. I buy a lot of stuff that wholesalers turn away because they don't know how to make an assignment fee on that, or something other investors just can't really figure out. And sometimes even when the seller's asking for a higher price than we'd like to pay, there's probably a creative finance angle to that where we can get their number, and then even get our terms right where we want them. So the stack method is basically you're just layering multiple avenues of finance. A lot of people have probably heard about seller finance, or a seller carryback is very common, where you buy a house, you put 80% down, and the seller might carry the other 10 or 20% of that, or you bring 10%, the bank brings 80, seller carries 10%. A lot of times the banks don't like to have loan to values close to or at 100%. So majority of the time doing seller carryback financing, the bank is just not a fan of that because they want the loan to value to stay at or below a certain point, especially in investor loans. DSCR loans specifically, the lenders don't want you to be above 80% loan to value, sometimes even as low as 75 loan to value.
So if I'm buying with an investor loan, typically, for example, say I see a property that's on market or off market and it's for $200,000 and I can see there's a discount on it, but I'm going to buy it for 200,000 and I buy with an investor loan, typically I'll have to bring 20% down at least, plus the closing costs. I have to bring $40,000 down to acquire that property, correct?
Yeah, you have to bring 40 to 50,000, depending if you're putting 20 or 25% down. So in most cases, that's a lot of money that most newer investors don't just have that sitting around. And so if you have an opportunity to offer a seller a full price on his property, where he might only be getting offers for 180 from everybody else, you could say, hey, I'll give you your full 200. We know what a price is for that. We've determined that. But I'd like you to carry that $40,000 on payments. And we'll make a payment to the bank on the first mortgage. We'll make a payment to you on the second. And the only issue is in DSCR lending, most investor loan companies, they don't want you to be above 80% combined loan to value. Generally, you are getting the down payment, closing the loan, and possibly recording a second position lien after closing. But sometimes still the banks don't like this. And there's potential that maybe you can get the loan called due because you're breaking a covenant or something similar.
Let's back up just to reiterate. So in this example, the seller is asking for 200,000, they're not getting it. They have 40,000-ish of equity in the deal. They owe the bank maybe 160. And so what you're saying is that we can make an offer to the seller saying, hey, we can pay your full 200,000 if you're willing to finance us that $40,000 so we can pay you that 40,000 over time. Is that accurate?
Correct.
Okay, so there's a few things here. One is how to structure it so the DSCR lenders or the whoever you're getting the loan with is okay with it. And then the other thing is how to structure that paperwork wise, because these numbers get confusing in my head when I start thinking about, okay, so they're going to finance us 40,000. We're using that 40,000 as a down payment. So it's how would I write that up? So I'm writing it up as a $200,000 sales price. I'm passing that off to the lender that I'm going to get a loan with. And then how do I write this all up and how am I getting that 40,000 to bring it down for that deal?
So 99% of the time, this is going to be a two-part transaction because the lender is going to want you to bring the down payment. And they're also going to want to ensure that they're in first position. So if
Mhm.
you're recording, even if they don't have a problem of being at 100% loan to value, if you're recording both that first and second at the same time, they don't want there to be any question of which one goes first. So they're always going to want you to record the first. And then after close, you could record that second. So the basic paperwork that we use would be a promissory note and a deed of trust. The promissory note would be the payment and interest that is going to the seller, just like a mortgage. It would outline all the terms to them. And then your deed of trust is going to get recorded to the county to secure that note. And that is something that you would record right after closing. So you would have to bring in the down payment, and then the title company will hold that down payment until after the loan closes and funds. And then upon funding, we'd have an agreement for those funds to get released back to you, those down payment funds. And then in return, they would record that note to where you would owe the seller the monies that you'd be paying on that second loan. And so again, there's very limited amount of lenders and products that allow this. There are some that do allow this, that allow two different loans. They still want you to close them separately. And there's a third way that we use very often. None of our lenders have had any types of issues with that. Instead of recording a second loan that puts it at 100% loan to value, is we first off, all these loans that we're doing, these investor loans, I only lend as a mortgage broker to other entities. So we lend to LLCs and corporations. We don't lend to any individuals. Most of these DSCR loan products that you're doing are all being in the name of another entity that has personal guarantors, which might be yourself. So the thing that we do is instead of recording a promissory note, we create an entity structure to where the seller becomes a member of the company, which is really cool because it also makes them in first position. So when you're
Mhm.
negotiating a deal with the seller, let's go back to the first deal where, hey, they're listing it for 200, nobody's giving them offers greater than 180. And now here you come in and say, hey, I'll give you the whole 200. It's an extra 20 grand than you were getting before. I just want to make payments on all of that money on the down payment. So you would create this structure. They might say, hey, I don't want to be in second position. If you stop making your payments, then how do I get my money if it gets foreclosed on? I don't want to have to deal with taking this house back. So you can do our other structure that's foolproof, where the entity that you buy the property in, you will, after closing, we create a new operating agreement. And the operating agreement outlines the members of the company. But anytime in a business's life, you can update and make adjustments to your operating agreement. You can add or remove members. You can vote on changes and compensations and things like that. So what we do is after close of escrow, we have a new operating agreement that comes into play that says, now we're adding a member B, which is the seller. So we put the seller's name as this member B. And in a business, you can have owner contributions and distributions. So what we do is we take that 40,000 down payment that the seller is going to cover, and you bring that to close like a normal loan. You bring your 20% down. And then we have escrow holdback agreement. So the buyer and seller agree to hold back $40,000 worth of funds until further notice. And that agreement only goes to the title company. And then when the loan closes, the seller gets their 160 out of the 200, and the other 40 stays at the title company. Once it closes, we give title company a new set of instructions that says both buyer and seller agree to release this $40,000 to such and such account. And it's at that point that this new operating agreement also goes into effect that says that seller does an owner contribution into Phillip Home Investments LLC of $40,000. And then over the next 5 or 10 or 15 years, whatever that term was going to be, that Phillip Housing LLC makes owner distributions back to member B, aka the seller, in the form of monthly payments. And in that
Okay.
case, now everybody is an owner of the property because you're both part of the company. So that means they're also in first position if something were to happen. And then the bank also doesn't have any issues because the loan to value is still 80%. Because there's not two loans. There's not a first loan and then a second position seller carryback recorded. It's just you both on an entity where the previous seller now has an ownership interest in the company that owns the real estate. And you can even refinance down the line. You can do all of these things and it would still be at 75 or 80 loan to value. Yet you can pay out your seller still over time.
Yeah, so a few questions. So one, so basically what you're saying is that whenever you have an LLC, you make an operating agreement, right? And so you can write inside that operating agreement the terms of to have the seller on those operating agreements. So the seller is technically an owner within that LLC, therefore they're in first position. And you can write out the terms of that agreement inside that operating agreement for the amount that you pay for the seller carryback, correct?
Yes. Yes.
And so if that's the case, though, that means you need to create a new LLC for every single one of these deals that you're doing. Is that also correct?
Absolutely, because you wouldn't want to have the seller as a member of an entity that you go and buy another property, because now they
Hmm.
would technically be
Technically,
also of this
right.
other properties.
Okay. So
Anytime you
that's so
do this,
that's
it's
yeah, so that's one way to structure it. And then you're saying what you're doing is you're having the title company have, so you have two separate agreements. One is for the lender. This is a purchase of $200,000 with 40 or with 20% down by you. And then you have a side agreement with the seller saying that they will finance that 40,000 to you. When the seller is getting funded that 200,000, which would be their 40,000 out, that 40,000 technically would go back to you and you use that 40,000 to pay for the down payment, and then you're paying back that seller over time.
yes, mostly. And I do this on the lender side too, as a mortgage broker. The lender wants to see the down payment received. So we can't
Mhm.
just manufacture these funds out of air, even though it's coming right back to you. So we have to actually have some real tangible funds.
Yeah.
So the purchaser is going to have to wire in or bring to the closing table that 20% down, no matter what. And then after closing and recording, either you're recording the second or we're doing the operating agreement. And then at that point, you would get wired back your 40,000 and it would basically be the seller's fund. So you bring in the 20% down payment that completes the 200,000 purchase price, 160 from the lender, 40,000 from you. The lender says to the title company, hey, have all funds been received? Title company says, yes, we received the closing costs. We've received the down payment. And then the lender says, okay, you are free to disperse. And at that point, the title company is going to disperse 160 to the seller. There's still $40,000 that is also the seller's money, right? And then at that point, after closing, we would give the release instructions, and then the 40,000 that is the seller's money, actually then the seller contributes that to your entity as owner contribution to become part of the company and property owner again. And then you would pay them back on the owner distributions over time.
Okay. And yeah, if anyone has questions, you can put them in the chat also, a few people live on this call. So if you're going to do this over and over again, that's probably not the most ideal setup because then that means you're going to have tons of different entities with different sellers as members on it. So it sounds like the most ideal way to structure this as an investor, just from an investment portfolio standpoint, would be to put them as a second position. Do you agree or disagree?
It's definitely is easier, much less paperwork to draft a promissory note and a deed of trust. Literally, oftentimes those documents are each 1 or 2 pages each at max. Where I can tell you right now, and I can probably pull this up too, is my multi-member operating agreement is 20 pages.
Yeah. And that's another tax return. You're filing another tax return for each one of these mortgage methods, which also bites into the actual profitability of each deal. And it's, yeah, there's just more to it. It's another LLC to do books on. For
But there is the fact that in those scenarios, it is not affecting your loan to value. You can still refinance in the future. It's you're not violating any bank covenants. I will tell you though, majority of banks, almost all of the time in their first position notes do say that you are not allowed to add secondary financing behind this loan without our permission. And what do people do all of the time on their primary residence and their investment properties? All of the time, they go get home equity line of credits and they go get second
Mhm.
mortgages. And none of these HELOC companies or second mortgage companies are ever going and calling the first mortgage company, say, hey, just so you know, before we lend this money and make a whole bunch of money on these fees, we just want to make sure that it was okay with you that we did this. Is not happening. So it's, in my opinion, it's very rare that this might happen. I would say maybe it could be a little more common on these investment properties, but if you're recording seconds, I would say that the likelihood of it becoming an issue is low. But I would always just say proceed with the notion that there could be a situation where you would have to pay off that second to cure any covenant breaking with the bank, or that you would maybe potentially have to refinance. Whereas if you do a multi-member operating agreement that way with owner contributions and distribution, that it is a foolproof method to where you're not
Right.
potentially violating any bank covenants. And a lot of people are creating new entities or series LLCs for every property anyway. I don't really operate generally like that, but we recently
Yeah.
did a deal on like a $1.2 million set of 4 duplexes that we had 4 properties wrapped up in the one operating agreement. So this would work really great on a package of
Right.
properties.
Would make more
Maybe,
sense.
yeah, that you would maybe be refinancing a lot of those, doing some rehabs, and they would still stay under that umbrella.
And we could do a
On
whole different video on series LLCs because series LLCs have pros and cons, and that can also be a really good way. So you can make a new profit or a new operating agreement for every single series cell. And so that's another way they potentially could structure it. Not all lenders allow for you to refinance in series LLCs, but that's a whole different conversation. So there are ways to structure this. Okay, awesome. So if you're doing a package, maybe do it in this manner. If you really want to be by the books, no potential violations, doing a new operating agreements is the most kosher way to go about doing this. You're not violating anything with those underlying financiers. But second position would probably be less paperwork, a little bit easier, a bit harder of a sell to the seller. But at the same time, if you have that relationship, they're going to be willing to do it. So if we're going that route, it's very similar with how you're structuring with the title company, where because one of the things is technically, if you're buying for $200,000 from that seller on one agreement, that 40,000 of profit should go back to that seller. So I'm curious how you're structuring that with the title company to have those as separate agreements. And are you telling the title company on the side, like outside the thread with the lender, that you have this seller carryback and to disperse that capital to you in exchange for a second position on the note, or how would you be structuring that?
I guess from lender banking standpoint, you really do not want to have 2 separate agreements or an addendum saying anything about secondary financing. One, because you're supposed to provide all purchase contract documents to the lender. You shouldn't be withholding that. What we do, in my opinion, and this I would say, I would always say to everybody, please speak to an attorney in your state about everything. All of this is just some personal experiences I've had and from talking with many lenders and banking directors
Not
and
an attorney.
account execs. Yes, I'm not an attorney. I'm
I'm also not an
not
attorney. So
close to attorney. But this is what I would say is I will say that a purchase agreement for $200,000 is all you need. Okay, you need a standard purchase agreement for the purchase price because there is no need for a secondary agreement because your seller is going to sign multiple things. First, the seller is going to sign an escrow instructions agreement, and that is something that is specifically for the title company that has nothing to do with the lender at all. And so, this escrow instructions agreement is going to just say, hey, both buyer and seller agree that 40,000 out of the $160,000 funds shall be held back at title until further instruction from both buyer and seller, signed buyer and seller. And that's it. So what that does is that locks up that 20% that the seller has verbally agreed that, hey, yes, I will carry that for you. So that instruction set ties that money up. Okay. And then you're going to have your promissory note. And there's going to be a promissory note that says $40,000. Philip Housing LLC agrees to pay such and such seller $40,000 over such period of time, signed by seller. And then we'll also have the deed of trust that's going to be signed and notarized with that information and recorded. So the whole back agreement protects the funds, the promissory note, and the deed of trust secure the seller's interest in those monies. And the title company agrees to not release those funds back to you until simultaneously recording that promissory note and deed of trust. So the money gets secured and protected. The title company records that second mortgage after closing of the first mortgage, and then those monies released back to you. So it's all handled by a third party transaction. There is no need for another agreement because the escrow instruction set covers all of that. And the promissory note on the security, the deed of trust are legal documents that ensure that the seller's getting paid and the title company knows to record that. And we can put that on the escrow release instructions is that $40,000 funds, both buyer and seller agree to release these funds upon fully executed and recorded deed of trust and then released to such and such account that was verified by both of you and signed. And that keeps it nice and clean for the lender. That also keeps you from that you're not withholding, non-disclosing of any purchase agreement amendments, any secondary financing and amendment addendums. It's just a holdback of some of the seller's funds that are going to be determined that something else is happening with those later. And that's really determination of the title company and you and the seller post
okay.
closing.
And then so for the purchase agreement with the seller, how are you writing that up? Is that showing $200,000 purchase price with 40,000 financed?
Yes, and a lot of times you can put 40, 60, 70,000 finance, it doesn't need 10%. It's really most of the time the lender, I've not seen ever a time where the lender said anything about a purchase agreement that said 200,000 down, 60K financed. Maybe you were doing 70% and then you ended up doing 80 or vice versa. I never seen a thing where the bank said, oh, wait, your purchase agreement says you're doing 20, but now we're doing 25, or said 25, and now we're doing 20. I mean, the buyer, the seller, nobody's necessarily too concerned with that. I think that's really the disclosure
Wouldn't
thing
they
and
ask questions about the seller financing portion? Because then they need to know how much they're funding
which
the
party.
the bank or the lender.
The lender, there's nothing that states that there's a seller finance portion because there's not. There is no seller finance portion. There's a purchase agreement for 200, and you're probably saying you're putting 20% down. which you have to because you can't do 100% loan to value. So you physically have to bring the down payment. There's no way around that. You can have a
Hmm.
partner bring the down payment. You can have what's called a transactional funder wire in
Yeah.
the down payment. If your lender doesn't require seasoned funds, somebody else can even send in those funds and charge you a fee for that. On the purchase contract, there is nothing about seller finance because there is no seller finance because you're bringing the money. You have to bring the money to close no matter what. With any of our products now, I do know like sometimes small town local banks, they will allow a traditional carryback. There's there's several conventional loan products that will allow up to 90 or 95% combined loan to value, potentially to where you bring 5% down, a seller does 15% carryback.
Yeah.
But
I guess I'm still confused with how that original purchase agreement is written up. Because if it's written up as $200,000 purchase price, there is that seller carryback that's occurring. And you said, but two separate agreements is not ideal
so there's
because you're giving them a promissory note and a deed of trust for a certain amount of money.
right,
Like, where is
but
that written up
the
originally?
it's not. So
So
there is
it's on the
so
side.
there
So,
it's actually no what it so think of it like this. There's a purchase agreement and there's a purchase that happens.
yes,
And you are putting 20% down on that purchase. And
yes,
that's
which
that.
can be transactional funds.
Yes.
It can be
It's
from a
so
partner. It can be
it's
your own money.
yeah, it's not a carryback. So let's just get rid of seller carryback
Okay.
because it's not that. So let's think of this transaction the way it has to happen with investor lenders. 100% it has to happen this way. No lender is going to allow a seller carryback on these investment properties that I know of, especially in the
Okay.
DSCR realm. Even our fix and flip products that allow secondary financing, they will not allow you to close them simultaneously because they want to
Yeah.
ensure without a doubt that their lien got recorded first. So from just like a brain power standpoint, let's just say there was an agreement, and this would be the theoretical agreement. Buyer agrees to buy the property from seller if seller agrees to do a cash out second mortgage for buyer upon after closing. So what is happening is that the seller is technically giving you a cash out refi after close because you've already closed. It closes and it funds and then there's a second mortgage recorded. So it's not at that point, it's not really a seller carryback because it's already been sold. It's just a person lending you money in second position. In terms of what is or isn't a seller carryback, I would just say this is not a seller carryback. This is a prior seller lending you money in second position because carryback is usually as closed at the same time with the same transaction as a portion of the funds. And these specifically in the terms of the structure and how absolutely everybody is structuring these for creative deals are again on seller carryback, you don't have to bring the closing funds. It's already worked in. So what this is, you literally have to bring the money to title and close. And then after it closes, the seller is going to give you a loan from some of their proceeds. It just so happens this money all stays with the title company. And that's where you're insured that you're getting it because you both signed a title escrow agreement that says that this X portion of seller's funds will not go to the seller and they cannot be released because you both agreed that they will not be released till further notice. And again, it's why it only says shall be held back until further notice, because technically you shouldn't have also a release instructions agreement because you're still under contract to close on a property. And so you
Hmm.
really need to not be technically preemptively having
Yeah.
this structure already signed and in place necessarily because you could maybe be withholding information from a bank.
Okay. Yeah. So then do you have docs you can show us like of like how you structure one of these without the operating agreements, if, like with the promissory note and deed of trust?
Yeah, let me see. So all we are using is a standard deed of trust and a standard promissory note. So anything you could ask ChatGPT to write you a promissory note or a deed of trust, and that's exactly what's going to be used. So
And
what
does the promissory note write out the terms of your agreement?
the promissory note just says, Phil agrees to pay John $40,000 over 120 months at
Okay.
3%
Okay.
interest.
Okay. So the
It's a
promissory note is where everything's written up. And then the deed of trust is recorded. Then you have the promissory note that lays out the terms of your agreement with that seller for the remaining portion or whatever, technically the portion that they're financing you or that they're cashing you out with. The payback
correct.
terms for
Yeah.
the cash out.
Yes. So yeah, that and then as well as let's see, this is my let me see if I can find a holdback agreement here.
Yeah. And if you're planning to do a lot of these, I think a series LLC could be a really good way to structure it because we put limited partners on our operating agreements before, and it's a very clean way to structure things and it's good protection for the partners as well.
So here's okay, this is one I did. Can you see my screen?
Yes.
Okay. Here's the deal we did several years ago where we bought a duplex for approximately $145,000, and the seller agreed to hold back $32,000, and we ended up putting 2.5% down. So actually, I brought 22.5% to the closing table. Of that money and the proceeds, we signed this agreement to hold back 32 grand. And so this could be on your purchase, this could be the 20% down, anything. I put in a title company here, I put in property address, escrow number. This is my seller, just had this random company name. This right here is one of our businesses. Oops. Yeah, sure. I'll make changes. So you would put your seller, blah, blah, Bill Realty
Eh,
LLC.
So
So
this is your escrow agreement with the title company.
this is what the seller's going to sign that ensures that they don't get all their money, and
Okay.
they're not going to get it because they signed this thing. So it's very simple. It just says we, the buyer and seller, instruct the title company or closing attorney to withhold from the seller's proceeds from sale of the property the holdback amount and maintain the holdback amount in escrow to be dispersed only upon further written instructions from buyer and seller. And we both sign this, and that's it. This is all like you're talking about secondary agreements, all these things.
Easy.
All we
Yeah.
need is something that says seller will not get $32,000 of his 150,000 proceeds.
And then have you already
And
written up the promissory note at this point with the seller?
so, yes. So I've written the promissory note and I've probably signed it, or I might even be signing this at title.
Yeah.
But it's basically been written up with the terms, specific terms, and I'll be probably inking that upon at or around closing time, and then they'll record that. I'll probably sign that and then they'll record the deed of trust upon release of these funds back to me. And so this is our holdback. It's really super simple. This only goes to the title company. This holds back the X amount of dollars. You could potentially get if a seller, for instance, on a $200,000 loan is open to doing a carry for 100,000, theoretically you could get $150,000 loan from the lender and then
Right.
also get 100K carryback from the seller that you could use to renovate the property to maybe get the ARV up to 300,000. Actually structured many deals like that, almost similar to the way a fix and flip loan would go. So we have this is super simple, and then I would also have let's just say a lease.
And then if someone wanted to structure one of these, like, can you be a lender? Like, can you be the DSCR lender for deals like this?
I can for operating agreement based ones. The technically for us, it's just going to be a purchase.
And then if you're structuring one of
Uh,
these, you want someone to guide you through the process. There are creative TCs that you can go to that can help you with this paperwork and this process as well. If you're doing one of these deals, just want guidance for your first one.
Yeah. So yes, again, for us, it's just a purchase agreement, and your holdback agreements or any promissory note, deed of trust, or other operating agreements are all things that you would have to execute after closing. And they would just be through a set of escrow instructions. But you can also work with transaction coordinators that do creative transactions. Personally, I do all my own documents for that stuff, but I can't do those in something like this. I can't be your broker and your coordinator, basically. But I do have another deal we did. This is a duplex. Uh, Seller offered to do a carryback of 112,000. But this one we did through an operating agreement. So it was an owner contribution and release to our company, of which they became partners. And so this is what our release document looks like. So I had a holdback document, same stuff, the Lawrence property, and then holdback of 112,000. And then the release would be to this payee, which it just says Lawrence Octoplex. That was the LLC because it's basically 4 duplexes. Will be the payee, and wiring instruction to be provided prior to release by the manager. And that's where we deliver the new operating agreement showing that myself was the manager of that company, and I can provide those wiring instructions for release. And then we, the buyer and seller, instruct the title company closing attorney to pay the holdback amount to the payee at payee address listed above. So either I send it to my address or they send it by wire. And I had both the sellers sign this and then myself as the buyer. And so that lets the title company know, okay, everybody's okay to release this money. Depending on the case, the title company might want to see some type of documents of this, because in this case, we didn't have a promissory note and deed of trust. We had an entity. So they said, we'd like to see your operating agreement here, because technically people could defraud real estate in a way that you could inflate the price on real estate, in a sense. Hey, I'll sell you this for 150, but appraised for 200. Let's buy it at 200 and I kick you back 50. Technically, you're not supposed to do that because you're inflating the cost of real estate. I don't know where the laws are around that.
Hmm.
But in a case where a seller would be distributing funds back to a buyer, there needs to be a paper trail for that. It needs to be in the form of a promissory note to show that as a loan, not a kickback. Or in this case, they're going to want to see the operating agreement that shows, oh, okay, the sellers sold and they're using their proceeds to partner now with the new buyer. So on this particular deal, my title company said, hey, we need to see your operating agreement just so I have something to put in the file in case of an audit or anything like that. And so from there, we provided our operating agreement. And this is how I particularly do this, because I've walked it through with my bank. The bank's great with it. It doesn't violate any potential issues that could arise down the line in a refinance or anything. And so this, I'll run through it for a few minutes here of how I do this. The other thing about this is effective date of this operating agreement. This operating agreement goes into effect 1 business day following the date that the company obtains title to the property identified below. So when I buy the property originally, I'm just a single member entity LLC. I buy it like normal. I bring my down payment. Portion of that is held back via a holding agreement at title. And then after closing, my new operating agreement goes into effect after I purchase the property. The bank is generally fine with anything that is happening after closing in terms of title and operating agreement. So this goes into effect a day after closing, which means that I don't have to give this to the bank yet because it's not in effect. I have another agreement that's in effect. This agreement is not in effect yet. So it's basically null and void until, in fact, actually do close. And so upon closing, our company here, founded in Kansas, with a purpose to invest in these 4 duplexes. This is what I mentioned, is you can be in a situation where maybe you're buying a portfolio or something huge. This is over $1 million deal here. And so we've got member A. This is a company I own with a partner. That's what we originally bought the we bought the property in Lawrence Octoplex. Member A is a partnerized company, and then member B now becomes this trust. This Gail Marie Hill Trust becomes the member B. And this is where you put the seller on as a member of the property. They've got their address, their info, and then the manager is my company, because clearly it's your asset. You want to manage it. Your member B has no managerial rights. They're only an owner in the sense that they can give equity or get return of capital. And in this one, we're technically a 60-40 partnership based off our monies that we put into the company. You could change this any which way you want, but technically I contributed $700,000 through means of a loan, and member B contributed $450,000. So they contributed $112,500 on each of the 4 duplexes. So for a
Wow.
total contribution of $450,000 that they, in a sense, seller financed us, but really they paid us $450,000 to become part of our company. And the
Okay.
reason that they did that is because I offered to close in 10 days. I offered to give them $250,000 or more upfront. I only wanted them to at least let me pay the other $450,000 on payments. Okay.
And are you
Now,
paying them back with interest?
no interest. No
So
interest. It's
$450,000 was zero interest.
zero interest for 17 years with no payments until month 25. So 2 years with no payments. That lets me rehab the units because they are all atrocious. They haven't had any rehab in 25 years. They were fully paid off, but they needed siding, windows, gutters, roofs, paint, tons of interior work, tons of wood rot, new insulation. There's a reason we were able to get this with these terms, is because
Yeah. What do
they
you think
couldn't
that,
sell.
what do you think this properties would have been worth for cash?
Cash deal, I was willing to be around 600. Honestly, I wanted to
Yeah.
be at 550, but we were open
Okay.
to go up to 600, and they were dead set on 700, no matter what. And I said, done deal. I'll give you 250 up front, but you got to let me make payments on the rest. And they're
Nice.
retired. They have lots of money, but they just want to enjoy their time.
Yeah.
And so
It's a great one.
we gave them the easy button. And so the way this works, instead of a promissory note, is we set this up as a capital contribution. Member B contributed 450,000, and we're going to give them a monthly contribution of 2,500 a month until they're completely paid back. So we basically put their first payment September 1 of 2027. And then I put this extra note that member B shall receive distributions of 2,500 per month for 180 months, or until member B's capital contribution is fully reimbursed. See section 4.1 for further details, which I don't remember what's I put there, but it basically says if I sell or refi them out or do anything with the property, that once they're paid off, then there's no more payment.
And then for your loan that you took out, did you also get the rehab funds from that as well?
We did. So we took out a $700,000 loan to cover the purchase. And then the lender also gave us another 200,000 for renovations. So we have a total $900,000 loan, and then we've got $450,000 in working capital in the business that we're going to be paying out the sellers over that 17-year period. But
So,
it allowed us to pull about 300,000 out of the company at close. And then we left
wow.
150 in for other extensive repairs
So you got
above our
300,000, you still got $300,000 in your pocket after this, like from this deal.
right. Yeah, literally, I brought $22,000 to the closing table, which covered all 4 loans. And then after that, I got a wire transfer for 450,000 back.
Amazing. $300,000 deal is great.
And
Plus that,
450. Yeah. And so
right.
I pulled 300 out, but I left 150 for in case I ran over budget on renovations. But we do have maybe like a 1.2 million ARV. So
Nice.
of total capital to repay is 1.35. So it's essentially would be over leveraged after repair. But because we're at 0% interest,
Yeah,
the owner distributions are paying 30,000 a year off to the seller. So in 4 years, we'll handle that over leverage position. And then the
great
first mortgage,
depreciation. Yeah, for sure.
yeah, and then the first mortgage itself is paying about 12,000 a year in principal reduction. So
Amazing.
4 years will be break even, and then we're also depreciating almost $1 million in basis by the time the renovations are done. And then we'll have some forced depreciation, and by year 6, it's going to be going fast. And then in 15 years, we're only going to owe $500,000 on this thing. That's going to be probably worth a 1.5 million or even higher. So,
Yeah,
um,
what an awesome deal, man. And yeah, so for everyone this has been a ton of information, different ways to structure these deals, but listening to this over and over again to start to understand it and understand the different ways to structure it is just such a powerful tool that people can use to buy real estate in creative ways. This opens up so many doors for opportunities for people that are willing to finance a portion of what they owe. Because yeah, as I mentioned earlier, like when we were doing this, I didn't know about this tool. So it was like either subject to hybrid seller financing or full seller financing or cash, right? I didn't have this tool in my tool belt, and there were so many opportunities where I could have capitalized on if I knew how to do this. I want to open this up for questions. If there are any questions, Dustin, if you have any questions, we can open up for questions. But this has been great knowledge, Ashley. So thank you for coming on here. You definitely have a lot of wisdom in this space. I appreciate sharing this with everyone.
thanks.
Yeah, definitely, man. Really appreciate it. One question I have about that one specifically, because I'm talking to an agent right now about a seller that has two houses right next to each other. I'm probably going to bring this structure up to her because he wants a really high down payment if he's even going to consider seller financing. I'm curious as because the way that I was doing it, I was looking at it as two different transactions, like a DSCR loan for one house and a DSCR loan for the other house, and keeping them separate. But the way you're doing it with that one, you put all of them into one loan. Was that because you did you structured it to where he's a member of the company and not the second seller carryback, basically?
I have 4 loans, and I have
Hmm.
four first
Okay.
position loans with the lender.
Okay.
So I've got each of my loans with the lender are for 225,000 each.
Okay.
It was 175 towards the purchase and then 50 towards renovations on each. But I have in our operating agreement, we have all of the capital contribution and distribution in terms of what the seller contributed to the company and what is getting back is in one lump sum. So these are all side by side. So it's really a packaged up deal the way it's set up. So there's not a way where I would really want to exit any of those because especially with the terms being so good. But
Hmm.
even if you're working with the same seller and you've got two different properties there, it's probably advantageous to do each of those completely individually with the seller's financing terms. I would structure individual financing terms on each one of those because if you do want to go refinance one of those and then you have a second position that's one lump sum across two cross collateralized, it's a pain to get the seller to divide that up into a certain portion to do a partial release is what it would be
Hmm.
called at the title company to satisfy the
Yeah.
lender on a refi or a payoff of either one of those first notes even.
Yeah. Okay. So basically, so for these particular ones that I'm speaking about, they actually don't need any renovation. So it would just be like purchasing with the DSCR loan for each of them. So separate DSCR loan for each property. So for the one that you did, you're saying that you're still the way you set it up, you're still able to do. You're not cross
No,
collateralizing. Okay.
no,
Okay.
because I've got 4 first position loans and I have no second position loans.
I
So there's
see.
never a point at which I go to refinance any of those where the
Hmm.
lender is going to say, hey, we need to pay off your second mortgage, or hey, which
Okay.
one of these second positions is tied to which house, or because there is no second position. There's nothing to collateralize. They're a member of the company and they're getting distribution. So they paid money to become part of the company essentially. And none of that has a factor in your loan to value or your payoffs, which is the beautiful thing about that is if I want to do a cash out in 10 years, a massive cash out because maybe my value doubled. It's right near Allen Fieldhouse, near Cape's potential. That area gets a massive revamp that I could pull out several $100,000 and there's no net effect to the payments that I have with the seller, having to restructure or pay those off. So I can write out that 17 years of zero interest, paying the 2,500 all the way until it's fully paid off. And I could refinance the houses multiple times if I need to.
Gotcha. And the way you have it set up, like you were showing in the operating agreement, basically the seller is just almost a silent partner that has no managerial, I guess. He cannot dictate anything you do with the LLC besides just accept payments and equity for the property.
That
right?
is correct. And we didn't go through the fine print of the other 10 pages of that agreement, but it pretty much says that the member A has to all equity, all principal pay down. Member B is only entitled to a portion of the rents as they incur to helping pay their monthly distribution. They only can get their distribution. So they don't get equity, they don't get any of the net operating income, any of that stuff. They don't have any rights, any voting rights. However, we do write it in a protective way that if member A has any acts of misappropriation, embezzlement, intentional fraud, any similar conduct, is in default on the first mortgage, that member B can oust member A and or assign a new manager, and you can effectively lose your property. You need to be on top of it. I could have made the agreement definitely more suited towards ourselves, but this was reviewed by an attorney of the sellers, and we have our language in a way that it really protects all parties. That way, if a seller takes this to an attorney, which they should on something like this, that it can outline that, hey, there are protections for everybody here, that their interest is protected, their capital is protected, and if somehow I fail as the manager of the property, that I can lose the property back to them. And that gives them protection in the sense of, hey, I'm not just this second position here, that I actually, have rights to the property and I can take them back if I need to.
Yeah, makes sense.
Nice. Amazing. Awesome. Thanks, Ashley, for hopping on. Thanks, Dustin, for your questions and for tuning in. And if anyone needs to get a hold of Ashley, we'll have his contact details in the description here. Reach out to him. He's a wealth of knowledge and also can do all the loans that you guys need him to do. And yeah, definitely watch this video multiple times. This is really amazing information and really dense information. Dive in. Feel free to reach out to me also. If you want to work closer together, reach out to me. My contact information is below as well. And keep at it. And thanks everyone for tuning in.
Cool.
And thank you, Ashley. Cool.
Yep.